So hello and welcome to this launch event of the Medieval Murder Maps project. My name is Manuel Eisner. I started this project some 10 years ago or so, I can't remember really. And I'm presenting this launch together with Dr. Stephanie Brown, who is an ESRC postdoctoral fellow who has been working with me on this project for some time. It has been an extraordinarily busy day with a lot of attention internationally, nationally on this project that we will be presenting to you. And it's an exceptional pleasure for me to present this to the various groups that have been working on this project over the years. I want to, before I go into the map, we will quickly go into the map and I will show you how it works and what it does. And you're permitted, by the way, you're permitted to use your mobile phone and do it yourself if you are interested. But I wanted to start just with a few remarks on what the map is and how it was developed and what the background work was to create this map. And so the first question is, well, why should we have tried to develop this map? And there are two answers to this. One is more personal, and one is, one is the more scientific program kind. I think I got interested in this when I first read the coroner's records of London. And if you read these records, there is something, at least it was for me, something quite unique about it. It's like, in a sense, probably the first experience is almost voyeuristic because you're going back 680 years. And there is this one moment in time, there is this one day, a specific time, specific place, and you get just enough information that, at least in your brain, you start developing a story that is behind what is being told. And I thought that's quite a unique, quite a strange experience because so many historical documents are relatively dry and abstract, and they are the kind of document that gives you this sense of being very close to what is happening. And for me as a historian, this was quite exciting. But there are wider goals other than just my own interest in this. I think we both, everybody who's been involved in this, don't see this just as a criminology project. And I think it's important, at least for us, that users look beyond the macabre story of the killings and see more in it and try to understand more of it. I think one of the qualities of these documents is that they tell us so much more widely about late medieval society. And they tell us a lot, once you look more closely into these documents, about how people try to maintain order. They tell us a lot about how people try to do justice. And that's a very important and interesting thing to learn. I think also for people who are coming more from a sociology or criminology background, they're almost kind of like a distant mirror. The first intuition when you look at these documents, when you read these documents, when you listen to the documents, is how odd is this world? It's so strange, it's different, it functions in a different way. But then as you think about it a little bit more, you realize it's not actually that different, or there are things that are similar to what is happening in our world. And I think this process between engaging with a very different world and thinking about our own world is certainly something that we want to encourage. And then, of course, there is this special focus on place with the mapping exercise. And so there is a particular interest in this question. How can we describe and how can we understand how homicides, how crime was concentrated in certain places? And how is this different from that in modern societies? Just a few words on the data. At the moment, we're focusing on 3 cities. The 3 cities were not selected to exclude Cambridge. I think it's important to emphasize this because there is this suspicion Cambridge simply doesn't have the data, or at least I've not been able to find them. There is Cambridgeshire data, but they exclude Cambridge, so there must have been a local coroner and maybe the data. But it's an interesting combination of places because we have the capital of the north, and then we have the main center of learning in Europe with Oxford. They are in modern terms, other than London. London would be the equivalent about half the size of Cambridge these days, and both York and Oxford would be big villages. And I think that's important to bear in mind in terms of understanding how many cases we end up having. A word on the coroner's rolls that we're using. This is just a picture taking of one of the rolls so they get an idea of what they look like. This is on the death of Harvey of the Playford. It starts, if you can read this, well, it's too small. Promote where they play for it, and then inside there is always this marshal that says this happened in Farrington within, and then it describes this story. This is not, that's important for users to understand, this is not the first record that was kept. So there is a jury that meets, the coroner investigates the case, and then the clerk would write up the initial notes of what was happening on pieces of parchment, usually the cheapest bits of parchment that they could find, because it was very expensive. They would scrape up the paint, and then they would take notes. But then for the royal justices, this had to be written up in a more formalized way on what is called enrolled documents. And so they wrote up these rolls sometimes later, many years later, in a more stylized, formalized language, and that's what survived. That was what was sent to London, and that is often the basis of what we are looking at. The coroner himself is a royal official, and I think one of the things that I would like to explain to you that he is not. He's primarily a tax collector, and the tax collector characteristic of the coroner at the time explains why there was so much financial information in these documents, why we learn about the value of certain goods, why we learn about who are the witnesses that are, in the technical language, attached. What that means is that if you don't show up as a witness, we're going to find you, and that goes in the coffer of the king. Let me just say a few words on the maps. We have the great privilege to have been allowed to use historic maps of medieval towns that are of the very highest academic scientific standards that have been produced by the team of the Historic Towns Trust. And the three of them are here, and it's fantastic to have Caroline Barron, Vanessa, here, and then Alan Crossley has produced the Oxford map, and Peter Addiman have produced the York map. And these maps are not just maps. I think it's important to understand that they're much more than maps. They are big projects that also include information about the history of the city. They have information about the different types of buildings. They have further explanations. And it's quite an experience in itself just to not focus on the homicide cases, but look at the maps and try to get an understanding, looking at the maps, what the maps tell us about how daily life was organized, where the markets are, where the churches are, where the cathedral is, and so on and so forth. How did we figure out, sorry, this is a little bit, how did we figure out where the cases actually are? I've wanted to give you 3 examples. I'm just going to go into one example. Let me pick, I don't know, London, where, for instance, in the document it may say that Arcus tricked Stephen. This was a case related to backgammon. Never play backgammon. This was a case related to backgammon. Arcus tricked Stephen into accompanying him as far as the Church of St. Magnus the Martyr, and then with malicious forethought, which is an interesting word. I could talk for hours about this and the idea, pulled out a knife and stabbed him. And so the Church of St. Magnus the Martyr, once you get a sense of London, there is a lot of learning going on first. You'll understand where this is. And so And you know that this is on the London side of London Bridge. I don't know whether you can see this well enough. So it's just at the outset. It's worth visiting, by the way, because they have a fantastic model of London Bridge, a huge model of London Bridge that you can look at, and it gives you a sense of what this bridge looked like. Now, let me just see whether I can find my way back now, because I don't want to go here yet. Yes, okay. So this is the way we did this. The precision of these locations varies a bit. For most of the cases, we're pretty confident that based on the information, we are within 50 or 100 meters of the actual place that has been described. For Oxford, in most cases, we're also pretty close. For York, it's a little bit more tricky because sometimes we have to triangulate on the basis of where the jury members come from, because the jury members are always put together from juries from the 4 closest parishes. So this leads me to the map itself. And I wanted to just take a few minutes to show you through some of the main features of the map. So when you go on the map, you will see this picture. I just wanted to start with a word on the visual materials that we are using across the maps. We spent quite a lot of time, and I got very enthusiastic about medieval illuminated manuscripts. And we tried to make sure that across the entire map, we're only using contemporary visual materials from the 14th century. So basically, we're going broadly from 1300 to 1400, and mostly focusing on visual material that was actually produced in England. So the Luttrell Psalter or the Smithfield documents and other documents. Not always. There is also some of the visual material have been produced in France, but overall the goal was to be close to where the events happen. When you go on the map, you can, if I can do this, probably can switch this off. Yes, I can. So one of the first basic thing that you may want to do is to go to one of the maps, and I'll just go now to Oxford, and you get a little bit of a description of Oxford, and then you can look at all these events. The first thing that you will notice maybe, if it's big enough, that there is some red and some blue dots, and across all the three maps, the rule is, if it's red, then at least one of the participants is female. So the color just indicates, is it exclusively male? And you can easily see in Oxford, almost everything was exclusively male, or is a female involved in some row. And then within each pin, there is a little icon, and the icon says, gives you information about what the murder weapon was. So whether it was a sword, a knife, a baton, an arrow, or some other instrument. You can, of course, if I can do this now, you can increase the size. You will see here, by the way, that High Street in Oxford was one of the hotspots of crime. And then you can click on any one of these stories. Let me just see, this was a scrivener, but I want to go to one of the stories that actually has, this one doesn't, this allows me, yes, okay. So one of the things that you can do is, this is again, not exactly what I wanted to happen. Maybe this one. Yeah. Okay, so you can click on that, and then you get the story. You can read the story, and one of the things that you can do on quite a few of the cases, you can hear Charlie tell the story, and we should do this probably just to give you an example.
Doc Bennett Jr. urinates on Butcher's Market and kills a servant. In the late hours of Thursday, in the first week of Lent, 3rd of April, 1297, a certain William de Newsham, the servant of Sir John de Kitegrings, died in a guest house where Sir John had lodged on the previous Tuesday in the parish of St. Martin, Oxford. On the following morning, he was seen by the coroner, who established a wound in the front part of the head, 4 inches wide, 6 inches long, and 5 inches deep. An inquest was held on the same day by jurors of the parishes of St. Martin's, All Saints, St. Alberty, and St. Peter in Balliol. The jurors say upon their oath that on Tuesday, William de Newsham and others of the household of Sir John of the Keatgraves went to the butcher's market soon after curfew. There they found John Bennett Jr. urinating between 2 stalls. William de Newsham drew his sword and struck John Bennett with its point across the fore of his head. John immediately raised the hue and cry. He then entered the house of John Bennett Sr. and looked for his sword. Then he, together with John Bennett Sr. and John de Waterford, followed them towards the guest house of Sir John de Keatgraves, where William de Newsham and his companions had returned.
Good. So you get the idea. One of the reasons why there's many reasons why we thought having voiceovers would be fantastic, but one of the things that you may have noticed is that we tried to create also a sense of the different voices that are speaking. So you always have the first part, which is basically the coroner speaking, and then you have the transition in every single of these records where the jury speaks. It summarizes what the jury has found, and then there's a third part where you have the final conclusion. So that's one thing that you can do. Then at the bottom of the page, you always also have possibilities to select different types of characteristics. You can only look at male or female cases. You can look at particular weekdays. For instance, if I go out here, you will see, for instance, if you just look at the Mondays, you will see there is almost none. You look at the Sundays, oh, there is a lot. so it just gives you a very quick, easy way to understand that the Sundays were basically the Friday and Saturday nights, nice time, situations where a lot of things happened, and that was the case in all cities. When you go on a case, there is also at the bottom, there is always this. You always get this little. I thought this is very nicely done, Steve. Sam, this little enlarged section that only focuses on the case, and so it allows you to get a better sense of what has been happening, what is around the case, what is the environment within which this event happened, and again. The historic hands maps are a fantastic tool to get a better sense. This is just on the wish list. If you had all the taverns, I know that. Because for a criminologist, knowing where the alcohol is just a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting thing to have. One of the things that you will see is that at the bottom of every case, we have this discover more field. And so over the years, we've developed kind of like an attempt to help people to better understand all kinds of aspects. And at the moment, we have 36 themes that we're covering, and we will be covering more themes. And here, for instance, you have abjure the realm. As a topic, you can click on this topic and it takes you to a little text that gives you an explanation of what abjuring the realm means and how it's used. And I don't know whether that's the case here as well. And so generally we've tried then to embed hyperlinks. So if you're interested in what is happening, now you can migrate further and you can actually go to cases that have abjuration in them. The individual discover more items are randomly displayed. And this is just to make sure that users get a new experience each time they go there, and also to make sure that you're not bored. So you're basically led through a discovery tour of what you want to understand. But if you want to do this more systematically, you can also go on the Discover More page, and you have all the topics just displayed systematically in a more systematic way. I think this is the main things that I wanted to explain. There's probably just one thing that I wanted to highlight for the London map only. We have thematic maps other than homicide. So for Oxford and York, we only have the homicide cases. For London, we have included the cases of accidents. So the coroner is also responsible for accidents that might have been, some dodgy third-person involvement. We include all the church sanctuaries. Why does the coroner know it? Because the coroner is the person who has to negotiate with the person who has been seeking sanctuary. We have all the cases of sudden illness, and we have people in prison, and that's probably among all the sad cases that we have here. Just looking at the list of 56 people who died in Newgate prison within, I think, just 4 or 5 years, is just quite an extraordinary thing to look at. And the verdict by the coroner was always natural death. The last thing that I wanted to mention here before I hand over to Stephanie is that we have now 2 episodes of the podcasts. The host of the podcast, so the producer of the podcast series is Steve Hankier is here. And Nora is the host. My daughter is hosting, so it's a little bit kind of like astrophysicist is interviewing criminologist kind of arrangement. And we now have 2 episodes, and we feel terribly guilty because we wanted to have all the episodes ready, and we're not quite there yet. This is going to be done very soon. So this was the introduction, and I now would like to hand over to Stephanie for some selected findings.
Hello. So yes, I will talk through some of the findings. We've got 2 research papers that will be submitted in the next couple of months, but I'll give you a sort of whistle-stop overview, and then I'm happy to take any more questions on things that you're interested in. So what I want to draw your attention to first is the data behind these results. So if you look in the top line here, you can see the time period covered by each of these maps. And you'll notice that they're primarily in the 14th century, but we're dealing with different time periods. So this is just something to bear in mind when I'm going through and talking about the rest of the results. This is a result of record survival in some cases, especially for London. These are the roles that survive. So this is what we are left with. And it's also symptomatic of the fact that this project started in 2 different departments, Manuel working here in criminology and myself working across the road in the history faculty, and now we've joined them together. You can see the number of years that we've got on the maps. So London is the much smaller time period, but due to the sheer size and population of the city, we actually have the most cases from just these 9 years. If any of you have been following the media coverage of the launch today, you will see that this figure in red for the homicide rate for Oxford is what has caught the attention of the media. And Manuel found it important to caveat that we didn't pick Oxford and ignore Cambridge through any slander. Again, this is record survival. We were interested in looking at Oxford because this brings something different than we can see in the other 2 towns. So London and York, as we will see, sometimes produce quite similar results, whereas Oxford, the university, the male-dominated population is skewing some of is affecting some of the results. These rates in all 3 towns they can seem quite alarming, they can seem very high, And this can lead us into the trap of thinking that the Middle Ages were incredibly violent, were incredibly lawless, that everyone went round committing homicides. But there's two important things that I want us to bear in mind, and the historians in the room will probably already be thinking this, is that we're dealing with the pre-modern world, so we haven't got modern medicine, emergency services. So a lot of the cases, as you're reading through them, you'll see that it took people quite a long time to get their wounds sometimes. So sometimes people are dying hours, days, or even weeks after the attack. So these appearing in homicides in the 14th century, a lot of those cases, if they happen today, they would not end up being fatal. So this is inflating the medieval homicide rate. And something that I'll go on to say a little bit more in a moment is that weapons were more present in medieval society than thankfully they are today. So the first results I want to talk about is the sex ratio. So Manuel's already showed you the map. You can see that when you look at the map straight away, you can tell whether the cases were between two men or whether they involved women. And you'll see that we've got some similar results across the three towns, that men dominate the suspects and the victims. And for the criminologists in the room, this is something that persists throughout time and probably doesn't come as a surprise. We expect violent crime to be dominated by male suspects and victims. But what is interesting here is that there is a difference between the three locations. You'll notice that Oxford has the lowest female participation, both in terms of suspects and for victims. And this is probably because of the university, the town would have had skewed sex ratios and more male presence in Oxford compared to the other two locations. And London here is quite striking. We see the highest share of women being involved as suspects and victims. And the percentage for female suspects is quite similar to what we would expect to see today in cases of homicide. And this remains sort of consistent from the Middle Ages right up to the present day. And this probably gives us an insight into the social, legal, and economic freedoms and opportunities that women in medieval London would have experienced compared to women in other parts of the country. What Manuel also showed you is that our pins give you the weapon. So you can look at this straight away and you can also filter by that. So if you're interested in looking at a particular weapon, you can filter by that and see how it's spread across the town that you're looking at. And I can take more on this in questions if anyone's interested in any of these weapons or methods particularly. But what I want to draw your attention to is that in all three locations, knives are prevalent, are the most often weapon used. And again, this is something that we see today. Most homicides today in England and Wales are committed with knives or sharp weapons. There's a slight difference between London and the other two locations in that London, we see long knives being used more than the short knife. So the short knife was something that a man would carry on their belt as a tool for preparing food or just in everyday tasks, so not something that is its primary purpose is not a weapon. Whereas the long knife is something more sinister, such as a dagger, where its primary purpose is a weapon. Perhaps the difference for this is that we maybe see more higher status people in London. These knives, such as daggers, are always valued much higher than the short knife. The short knife is typically valued at just 1 pence. We've already touched on sort of temporal patterns and when we're seeing a spike in homicide. On this graph, it's giving you data for London and Oxford only. The reason for this is because the York coroner didn't always record the time of day. For whatever reason, they didn't think that was important to write down. But in the other two locations, we get the time of day in the majority of cases. And here you can see that we have spikes in the evening, and then we have a spike on Sunday more generally. And as Manuel alluded to, this is the medieval day of leisure. This is when people have their day of rest, when they are supposed to be going to church, or they are socializing in taverns, when they're going about unstructured activities. And criminologists will see patterns with today in that we get spikes in violent crime in our leisure time, which happens on Friday nights and Saturdays. The final pattern that I want to talk to you about is we've started to look at hotspots. So where are the crimes happening? Where are they concentrated? I'll walk you through York, but we're finding similar things across the three towns. So you can see that the first hotspot, for those of you who know York, is on Stonegate, right up by York Minster, by the cathedral. This was a processional route. It's a residential area. We've got taverns, shops, workshops, and it was a thriving trade area. We see lots of middling sorts in this area. We see the political elite living in this area. There's a couple of mayors living in this area. The hotspots at the sort of bottom of the screen, and you can decide whether that's one or two hotspots, is the main approach road into York. So this is Micklegate, the street that runs from the south right through the city to the north. So this was a busy road connecting the south with the north. And this runs up over to Ousebridge into Marketshire, the area around Pavement today. Again, this is a wealthy area for the traders and craftsmen, and one of the main market areas. And when we first mapped this, we found this quite surprising. What we were expecting is to see hotspots in sort of marginal, more deprived areas of the city, but we were actually seeing the opposite, sort of in the wealthier trading parts of the city is where we're finding our hotspots. So I will hand back to Manuel, but as I said, I'm happy to explore that further or to take any other questions on the results.
So just a few words. I was thinking this is going to be the end of this project, but it's probably not, or not yet. So I already said that we will finish at least the first podcast series, and we'll work on this. We've already mentioned that we will be doing 2 scientific papers. Now this is the realistic ground. Now come the more unrealistic elements, but it would be very interesting, and the data are available, to add more places that are different. So far we're focused on cities, but there are very good ones of coroner's records for more rural areas, for Bedfordshire, for Kent and so on. And so it would be interesting to have a map of more rural area so that people can better understand. They were not, just a second, they were not more peaceful, but the character and the situation, the context would have been quite different. And one of the other things that might be interesting, I know that other teams have been working, for instance, on the extraordinary documents run of documents in Bologna. And it would be just very interesting to have kind of like an international, European-wide network of maps that allow people to use. And now that we've built up the structure, we've designed this, Sam has designed this from the beginning, that it's modular, so you can add more places and use exactly the same approach and build this up and expand this. So this is the end of the presentation, of the formal presentation, but I wanted to just end this with my thanks to all the members, people who've been contributing to this project in different ways. I wanted to start with all those who've been involved in finding, coding, simplifying the texts, because what you can read on the screens, they are not the original coroner's records. So they're quite wordy, and they have a habit of not having any any periods, and so it was just one long flow, and so we've broken this up and eliminated drops on it. So Jeremy Rees, Michael Weiss, Brigitte Brun, Ruth, Simone, who's now joined us, who's been helping in various ways, and Lion Kelly have been all contributing to this task. Then I mentioned Charlie over there, who's been doing the voiceovers and also getting a little bit interested in the stories and telling them and creating the sound effects in addition to much more serious work that he's also doing. Then, of course, Sam Barnes and the team at Design Monkey, it's been exceptional. Just with all our requests to have another change and something else being done and so on, it's exceptionally patient with us, and they produced a fantastic map. It's just it's very impressive. Then the historic towns maps team, Caroline Barron, Vanessa Harding, Chris Briggs, and the Historic Towns Trust. It's been exceptionally, we are exceptionally grateful. First of all, the opportunity to use the maps, but also for all the academic input and the active engagement with what we've been doing and the encouragement throughout. We are kind of like newcomers. And so we're coming into a field, and then so it's been a great privilege to be able to work with you. Then the podcast producer Steve Hankey, Nora, who is the host of the podcast. We have other music produced by a Swedish band who specializing in medieval music, which you can listen to. Then Ruth has been doing the geocoding, the quality control, endless looking at maps and trying to find places and so on. Fred Lucy from Cambridge University Communications, who has produced the media release, but has also been involved in the first release and in between, just being interested in what we're doing. And Simone, who is doing the social media. Then I would like to thank the team who's been helping with the event logistics this evening, Rebecca Green and Cheryl, who've been preparing also the food and the drinks upstairs. And I would like to then also thank all the others who've been participating in the development of this project. For one, the various history of violence classes, who then also joined for excursions. So you can do, this has become a little bit of a standing element of the optional course that I take students out to, now we can also go to Oxford next year and look at the places. Campop, then a number of people who've been just good friends, who've been engaging, listening patiently. When I was talking too long about the medieval murder matching patent to Lawley, my son Florina, his partner, my older daughter Rahel, the City of London tour guides, Louise, and others who've been interested in the map, and it was such an encouragement also to have the idea, to get the impression that what we're producing might be also useful for you and something that you can work with, that you can use for planning your tours, for taking visitors to the City of London and learn something about the City of London in a different way. There was a moment when we were thinking about having a GPS tracking so that you get alerted when you're within 100 meters of a murder case, but this is probably a project for next time. The medieval and Tudor London seminar participants, where we were invited to present the project. Brian Moody, the chief commoner of the City of London, who joined us at the event at St. Lawrence in Jewry and the Museum of London. So this is Thank you, everybody who has been helping with making this work. We will see what happens and how people are interested. At least the first day looks very promising. We have a lot of interest. Thank you all very much for joining us. And again, a special thanks to everybody who's been contributing so generously to this project over these years. Very much appreciated. Thank you all very much.